tension is rising over China's newly declared Air Defense Identification Zone, asserting its air rights over a hotly contested chain of islands that China calls Diaoyu and the Japanese call the Senkaku. It's the latest move in a decades-old diplomatic standoff. The U.S. military responded to China's claim with some muscle flexing of its own, sending 2 unarmed B-52 bombers through the heart of that contested airspace. So is China spreading its wings while trying to clip the wings of longtime rivals in the region? The U.S. Vice President Joseph Biden heads to China later today, and he hopes to push forward America's troubled pivot to Asia. First, though, he did stop in Japan, which the U.S. is treaty-bound to protect, and after meeting Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he delivered Beijing a sharp diplomatic rebuke.
We, the United States, are deeply concerned by the attempt to unilaterally change the status quo in the East China Sea. This action has raised regional tensions and increased the risk of accidents and miscalculation.
So joining me now is the leading architect of that pivot to Asia. He's Campbell, who until early this year was Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Joining me now live from Washington. Welcome to the program. And let me ask you straight off, you heard the Vice President talk about a potential miscalculation, an accidental conflict being triggered. How likely do you think that is, and what will that look like? Let's be serious.
First of all, it's great to be with you on the show today, Christiane. Alas, it is much more likely now than it's probably been in years. And I think the consequences in the local sense would be a small skirmish, probably easily contained. But the larger context, particularly of the relationship between what is really the two great countries of Asia, China and Japan, the consequences are impossible to underestimate. I think tensions between the two countries are greater now than they've been probably in a half century. And this most recent declaration on the part of China makes the tense situation that much worse.
So what can Vice President Biden or anybody in the Obama administration do to de-escalate this right now?
Well, I think right now the most important thing that the United States can do is draw a very clear line about that the new demarcation of a military air zone along the lines that China has indicated is deeply provocative. Let's not forget that through this airspace every day travels dozens of airliners. This is a recipe for the kind of incident that we saw in 1983 with the downing of Korean Airline 007. It creates uncertainties with fighter aircraft coming up to inspect. This is not helpful. And what it... Sorry?
Sorry, given that and given what you say, the U.S. has to be very clear about this provocation, as you've termed it. Is there a clear U.S. red line that's been drawn then? Because at first, people thought that President Obama did the right thing, sending over the unarmed B-52 bombers. Now the administration is talking about urging civilian aircraft to seek permission or identify themselves to the Chinese. The Japanese don't like that very much. Is the Obama administration showing too much flexibility here?
Well, there are two imperatives here, in a sense. One is on the military side, in which we responded very clearly that we were not going to acknowledge this new declared zone on the part of China. Civilian airspace monitors in Japan, the United States, and elsewhere have a different set of metrics, and their prime directive is to avoid a mishap in the air, basically on top of anything else. And so their initial guidance was apolitical in that sense. But I think the problem is that it has created a little bit of incoherence, and I would expect that Vice President Biden will try to clarify what our position is going forward.
And what is the position then? Are you the former Assistant Secretary?
Yeah, I think what will likely happen is that we will continue to operate militarily in that area as we always have been, and people fly through there regularly. I think that there will be some clarifications with respect to the FAA in the coming days or weeks that will make clear that we do not recognize this zone, but certain kinds of communication protocols will be followed to avoid a problem. Now, I recognize that it's imperfect, but given where we are, that is the best we can do. What the Vice President has to do, though, is privately convey to Japan and China that, look, this is the cockpit of the global economy. It's the only place on the planet where economies are growing. They are fighting over a barren rock in a distant part of the Pacific. Now, I know it represents larger sort of nationalist identities and the like, but these problems have existed for decades. And the key here is you have to export it into the future, change the subject, recognize that both countries have much bigger stakes than struggling over the identity of an uninhabited island in the middle of nowhere.
Kurt Campbell, thank you so much for joining us.